Regal Cinemas. You may know them as the second largest film exhibitor in the country, owned by Cineworld, the second largest film exhibitor in the world, makers of this pre-show movie.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart.
As F.
And even more importantly, this pre-show movie.
Enjoy the show.
Like all massive corporations, Regal has a humble origin story that belies its current world-domineering status. What's more interesting than Regal's origins, however, is the experiment that briefly catapulted them to the forefront of interactive entertainment. A sequel of sorts to the Megaplex, an indoor entertainment center called Funscape. The story of Funscape is impossible to tell without some context. The Regal Cinemas we know now may look completely different today if not for the Funscape project in the 1990s. Regal was the result of a partnership between two men named Mike Campbell and Neil Melton. Mike had worked as a grocer for White Stores, a chain that operated independently in Knoxville and other cities in East Tennessee before its sale to Food City Corporation in 1989. He had worked for the White Stores chain for over a decade before he began a career change in the early 1980s. It all started in 1981, when the Star Theater in New Tazewell, Tennessee, closed down. The Star Theater opened sometime in the 1930s or 40s. I tried finding out exactly when, but unfortunately that history appears to be lost along with the building, which burned down in 2018. Like many old movie houses in the country, the Star did not survive the transition period in the 1980s to the Megaplex era of exhibitionism. When the theater closed, a 28-year-old Mike saw an opening. He partnered with his friend Neil, who was also a manager in the grocery business. The pair bought the Star Theater, refurbished it, and reopened it in 1982, showing the new summer hit E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
With never-before-seen footage, enhanced special effects.
According to the LA Times, the theater was a hit, with lines stretching around the block for weeks. Mike and Neil parlayed the success of the Star Theater into Premier Cinemas, a chain the pair would co-own, and they continued to buy movie houses over the next 7 years. One chain they bought was 3 Ohio theaters that were owned by a man named Rick Roman, who was integral to the story of Funscape, but we'll come back to him shortly. By the end of the 80s, Premier Cinemas owned 160 theaters in 30 locations in 5 states across the Southeast. In 1989, they were offered a buyout by Dallas-based Cinemark Theaters.
Hey, let's party, let's rock. We've got tickets to Cinemark. Come on with me, I'm Front Row Joe. Starstruck Penny, where did she go? Keep the peace in the Wild West. That loud dude is such a pest. Clyde, I'm running you out of town if you don't put that cell phone down.
Cinemark at the time was the 6th largest exhibitor in the country and paid the pair $21 million for their theaters. Mike and Neil planned to take time away from the business, but couldn't relax for more than a few weeks. Within the same year, they created a new theater chain called Regal Theaters, which would be based in Knoxville, Tennessee.
So, it's a choice between Disney World and Knoxville. Knoxville! 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 I concur.
Their first purchase was Town Cinemas in Searstown Mall of Titusville, Florida. The theater had opened in 1968 as a single screen before expanding to 2 screens in 1978. Mike and Neil invested an additional $750,000 to upgrade the theater, adding 5 more screens, expanded seating, and upgraded audio. They changed the name to Searstown Mall Cinemas and opened it in the spring of 1990. The new business was a success.
We can't miss!
By the end of the same year, Regal owned 48 screens. By 1992, 229 screens. By summer of 1993, 318 screens. That same year, Regal went public, and also that year, they began to envision a new business venture that would change the course of the company. All major businesses diversify their portfolio at some point. It's the reason there are really only 5 or 6 corporations in control of everything. In the early to mid-1990s, Regal was beginning to see opportunities within family entertainment centers, a growing cottage industry of small-scale theme parks designed to cater to areas that were either physically too far from mainstream parks or couldn't afford them. An evolution of the basic arcade, family entertainment centers had advanced games, dining, live entertainment, party spaces, and, space permitting, full-scale rides and attractions.
There's always something happening, something going on. So come and have a good time at the Family Fun Centers.
Two of the earliest and best-known examples of a family entertainment center would be Chuck E. Cheese, the first of which opened in the late 1970s, and Dave & Buster's, the first of which opened in the early 1980s. However, it wasn't until the opening of the very first Discovery Zone in 1989 that the competition would explode. 1990 to 1995 was a feeding frenzy of family entertainment centers.
Hey, you guys are really hungry.
There was Battletech Center, iWorks Cinetropolis, Sega Virtualand, Blockbuster's Block Party, and Adventure Landing, to name a few. All opening within the span of 5 years, and all looking to overtake the same market share. During that same period, Mike Campbell was still buying movie screens, and Regal was gaining attention for their increasingly elaborate grand opening stunts, like having a dozen Elvis impersonators skydive out of a plane to celebrate a new Philadelphia theater. But Regal wasn't big enough yet to have its own real estate department. Re-enter Rick Roman. After Mike bought Rick's Ohio theaters, he hired Rick as a site consultant to scout potential Regal locations. Between 1990 and 1995, Rick traveled to over 400 cities to look for these new sites, like a lucrative location in People's Plaza, Delaware. One site Rick found was in the suburb of Western Hills, Cincinnati, where there was a 100,000 square foot vacant space that was the former home of a Hills department store. Rick pitched the site to Mike, who liked the location and the price. The only hang-up was the amount of space. Who needs a theater that's 100,000 square feet? Most multiplexes that Regal operated were 40 to 50,000 at most. But Rick had a pitch. What if Regal utilized the remaining space to build out one of these new family entertainment centers? Mike loved the idea, but the deal to buy that old Hill store in Ohio ended up falling through. As it's said, good ideas never die. And within 6 months, Mike had an idea. Mike told Rick about a new theater that Regal was building in Chesapeake, New York, and asked Rick if he thought a family entertainment center would be feasible for that location. Rick performed a feasibility study and brought the results back to Mike.
This just might work out for both of us.
Mike quickly assigned Rick to design the project and come up with a budget. It's important to note that Rick wasn't new to this kind of work. Back when he was working as a theater owner in Ohio, he formed a friendship with the developer of the 3 Ohio malls where his theaters had been located. The developer asked Rick to help him with a site scouting job in New Orleans to see if they needed a new mall there. Rick checked that location and told the developer that they didn't need a mall, but instead a medium-sized theme park, citing Six Flags parks in Dallas and Atlanta as similar successful projects. Rick's belief was that theme parks are like movie theaters. People have a need for them, and New Orleans was an untapped market. Rick spent the next 3 years designing a theme park for New Orleans. He secured the land, designs, and funding from Bank of London, but the project still needed seed money to satisfy the bank. Rick and his developer buddy made an agreement. The developer would sell his malls, and Rick would sell his theaters in order to secure the seed money. The very next day, Roman received an unsolicited offer from Mike to buy his theaters.
It was meant to be.
The developer that had been working with Rick ended up backing out of that New Orleans project, but Rick had spent those 3 years learning invaluable lessons on the logistics of creating and building a theme park. For Regal's new venture, Rick could use this expertise in a meaningful way. Now all he had to do was build the thing. He started with a name, Funscape. For the design stage, Rick teamed up with Cincinnati-based designer and architect Bruce D. Robinson, known for his designs that are whimsical and off the wall, sometimes literally. Rick had met Bruce at a theme park convention in 1990 and worked with him on the New Orleans project, so they had already established a rapport and a shared sensibility that was perfect for the atmosphere they wanted to create in Funscape. While Bruce mostly handled the look and feel of the environment, Rick took charge in establishing what the space needed and where everything needed to be. Rick envisioned a use of the space that left no corner unused. Batting cages, mini-golf, go-karts, arcades, multiple food experiences, laser tag. He wanted people to be exhausted by the end of their visit. Each location would have some slightly different experiences based on geography and build. The Chesapeake location would be a fresh build, so there was more room for artistic interpretation than compared to an abandoned department store in Brandywine. Rick had strong partners in both Bruce, who helped him realize his ideas, and Mike, who had an unwavering belief in Roman's abilities and gladly signed checks for the project. That last point is important because Mike had built a reputation at this point for being a bit of a tight ass when it came to company finances. Nevertheless, Rick's ideas were larger than life, requiring Regal to go above and beyond for its target audience. One prime example is the kids' play area, where Rick envisioned giant board games where the kids could play as the game pieces. Licensing existing games was out of the question due to costs, but Rick insisted on designing one from scratch instead.
Well, all right. It was a jump to conclusions, Matt.
Mike agreed under one condition. Rick had to find somebody in the board game industry and get their stamp of approval for the new game. But Rick didn't stop at one game. He designed 3 rotating games for the project: The Treasure of Turtle Island, Wacky Racers Raceway, and Net Hero. Rick had a couple of degrees of separation from someone on the Pictionary team, who reviewed the games and gave their approval. Rick later found out that the Pictionary team was so offended that an industry outsider thought they could design 3 games by themselves that they spent almost a month looking for problems, but simply couldn't find anything. The games had been meticulously designed, but that was only one area where the Funscape project would cause a revolution. Rick is a bit of a futurist. He told me he had invented a way for people to order groceries over the internet in the early 1980s, ubiquitous now, but a little too confusing for people of the time. One of the other ways Roman helped Funscape leave a lasting mark was through its proprietary battery system. Funscape was the first entertainment or retail business to use tap-to-pay technology, another now ubiquitous element of everyday life. When you went to a Funscape, you didn't get coins from a machine like at a typical arcade. You would go to a counter where they would hand you a battery, a plastic card used at all of the game machines and experiences. Batteries could be charged in increments of $5 and gave kids a sense of fiscal responsibility in paying for rides and keeping an eye on their balance. Rick had found a company who was working on credit card readers for gas pumps, at the time a still new development, and he asked that company if their technology could be used to scan a ticket while adding or removing funds from it. While it's seen as revolutionary now, Rick did end up regretting the battery name, which added more confusion to an already confusing new technology. Funscape was also an early adopter in the ever-evolving point-of-sale technology field. Their first location utilized SoftSense OrderPoint terminals within the first year of operation. OrderPoint was a revolutionary point-of-sale kiosk allowing food and movie ticket orders with dynamic screens and custom animations, yet another way Funscape managed to gamify even the most mundane elements of a visit. So what was a visit to Funscape like? All of the sites had a universal entry experience, where you would enter a large themed foyer that had connection points to the various destinations, like the theater, food, or arcade areas. The theming of these foyers, designed by Bruce Robinson, subtly ranged from location to location, but generally included American colonial or Victorian architecture, recalling a turn-of-the-century town or Bourbon Street in New Orleans. One rare exception is the Knoxville location, designed to evoke a metropolitan cityscape. The foyer was free to explore, but access to movies or Funscape cost extra. There was also quick service eating available from licensed partners like Sbarro, Blimpies, Orange Julius, Dairy Queen, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and Arby's. Once inside of Funscape proper, you would buy a battery with a charge and you were free to let loose on the games. As previously mentioned, the games were generally the same at all locations, but differences in space and sizing did mean that some locations had exclusive experiences. For example, the Wilmington location offered batting cages, Bolingo mini bowling, video golf, VR games, laser tag, bumper cars, a carousel with handmade horses, 2 18-hole mini golf courses, go-karts that went up to 18 miles an hour, birthday party rooms, a gift shop, a play area called the Amazing Clubhouse, stop and play interactivities, daily laser shows, and a candy store. There were also smaller motion theaters with cute facades that featured an homage to the Star Theater, Mike Campbell's first theater baby. All in all, Funscape cut a wide swath at the peak of its popularity. There was generally plenty of space for adults to hang out, and the movie theater was under the same roof if they wanted to see a civil action with John Travolta. Truly, Funscape had just about anything a family looking for a fun distraction would need. So why aren't they around anymore? A big reason would be just how many of these things Regal wanted to build. Funscape's first location opened in Chesapeake, Virginia on August 4, 1995, as part of Regal's new Greenbrier 13 complex. The site included the Funscape Center connected to a 13-screen multiplex. The project was an immediate hit, with the $9 million campus drawing sightseers from states across the region, curious to see the giant arcade or the 3-story mini golf course. Regal quickly capitalized on the momentum, announcing 2 more Funscape centers in Rochester and Syracuse, New York. By that time, Rick Roman and Regal began to have creative differences, among them the rushed timelines for opening the location. Rick had preferred to open the location in the school year to allow for a slower period to ensure that everything was working properly, a strategy Regal disagreed with and ultimately overruled. The Rochester location, located in Victor, New York, opened March 1, 1996, just over half a year after the first location. This site was part of the Regal Eastview Mall Cinema 13 and cost another $5 million for Regal. The third site was Syracuse, which opened in Cicero, New York on September 13, 1996, as part of the Cicero Cinema 13 in the Tin Can Mall. This location was part of an overall $10 million conversion for the Tin Can Mall. The location was planned to open in November of 1995, but delayed construction pushed the opening. By 1997, Regal was planning to open its 4th Funscape location at the Brandywine 100 in Wilmington, Delaware. This location would be Regal's greatest investment yet. It cost $18 million and was 150,000 square feet, bigger than the already enormous Chesapeake location, complemented by a 16-screen megaplex next door. The Brandywine project was also delayed, with an original opening of May 13th pushed to June 6th. Regal also faced an unexpected challenge in hiring for the location, with employment rates in Delaware that didn't necessarily align with their expectations to hire 250 people, and competition from other new anchor stores that offered better pay. After the opening of the first location in Chesapeake, Rick Roman had decided to move on from Funscape, but he had an agreement with Regal to stay on for the opening of 4 total sites. With the opening of Brandywine, Rick's side of the agreement was fulfilled. Regal pushed forward without him, with plans to open 2 Funscapes a year. Their second location for 1997 would be the Cypress Creek Station 16 location in Fort Lauderdale, which opened July 25th. By the late 1990s, Regal had found that competition in the family entertainment sphere was getting stiffer by the minute. Disney Quest, Main Event, and GameWorks, a joint venture between Sega, DreamWorks, and Universal Studios that was spun off from Sega Virtual Land, were all new ventures, and existing competition like Discovery Zone and Chuck E. Cheese were expanding in ways that Regal struggled to match. 1998 brought 2 more Funscape locations, both in Tennessee. The Green Hill 16 in Nashville opened September 25, 1998, and the West Town Mall location in Regal's home city of Knoxville opened November 6, 1998. The Knoxville location was seen as especially problematic, with most Regal personnel commenting publicly that the project cost more money than they wanted to know, and it was only built due to Mike Campbell's connection to the city. Phil Zaccaretti, Senior VP of Marketing and Advertising, said,
"Flat out, it got built here because this is Mike Campbell's hometown. When this opportunity came up, it was his decision to do so."
If that was the takeaway in 1998, the 1999 didn't seem to be shaping up very well. And wouldn't you know, it didn't. After the Knoxville operation opened, Regal was still planning more locations for Funscape. One was under construction at the Charlestown Mall 18 in St. Charles, Illinois. 2 more were planned for Ohio and Baltimore, but protests from locals permanently stalled those plans. By 1998, Regal was in the middle of some massive changes. That year, they underwent a leveraged buyout by 2 firms, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts & Company of New York and Hicks Muse Tate & First of Dallas. Funscape had its success, but Regal's insistence on investing into that side of the business was causing them to hemorrhage money. There were band-aids that were deployed, chief among them the Escape, a second location for Fort Lauderdale that would cater to the adult crowd. The Escape opened in July 1998 at Las Olas Riverfront, but barely lasted due to its firmly family-unfriendly tactics. Originally, the Escape kicked out anyone under 18 by 6 p.m. on weekends. By September of 1999, the policy was scaled back to allow kids until 10 p.m. By late 2000, the Escape was gone. The location in St. Charles, Illinois opened on November 5, 1999, and would be the last opening Funscape would see. By the turn of the new millennium, the family entertainment bubble had burst. DreamWorks had backed out of GameWorks. Discovery Zone was liquidated. iWorks Entertainment pivoted away from Cinetropolis, and Disney Quest had shuttered one location and canceled plans for another. In May of 2000, Regal was still the owner of Funscape, but they had handed over operations to Palace Entertainment. That November, Regal closed all Funscape sites, including the massive Brandywine campus. By the end of 2000, Funscape was dead. In September of 2001, Regal filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and closed 646 screens across 98 theaters. Several years after Funscape was shuttered, a lawsuit was filed against Regal by Rick Roman and Lasertron, the makers of the Ground Zero laser tag experience, alleging that Regal had breached their contract with Lasertron by closing the locations before the terms were through and providing inaccurate reports of Ground Zero patronage at Funscape. Lasertron and Roman won the case. What went wrong with Funscape? It depends on who you ask. The pragmatic answer would probably be that Funscape is what went wrong with Funscape. The 1990s family entertainment center explosion was a fad, and like all fads, it had an end date. There was also the advent of home video game systems with arcade-level graphics becoming affordable enough for families to stay at home and play, instead of forking over $5 a pop for playtime. Rick Roman believes that Regal simply went too fast. If they hadn't invested so much money in such a short time span, not only into the Funscape venture, but also buying up more and more screens in the Southeast, then maybe Regal could have avoided some of the problems that ultimately led to their financial crash at the start of the millennium. Regal ultimately survived, weathering several periods of financial instability, a 2017 acquisition by Cineworld, and a global pandemic. Rick Roman has operated several theaters on the East Coast since his Regal days, including the recently renovated Crown Point Theater in Elizabethtown, Kentucky.
When the lights go down, I wonder why little babies start to cry. They gotta be good or go bye-bye. The brightest star in the galaxy, cinema fun is